Well, today we are speaking of David Alfaro Siqueiros. Siqueiros is the most controversial artist of Mexico. During his life, he was constantly jailed and deported because of his political beliefs. He was a soldier in the Mexican Revolution and then again in the Spanish Civil War. And perhaps because of the controversies originated by his politics, Siqueiros has not been given the full recognition he deserves as one of the great innovators of art in the 20th century, because Siqueiros was not just a revolutionary in life, he was also a revolutionary in art. He was a pioneer of new materials. He uses acrylics and car paints and dreams of doing outdoor murals. He also develops the idea of billboards as a form of artistic expression. And he believed that in the future, the exhibits would be done in these billboards in the freeways and in the roads. He's also a pioneer in the idea of motion. And in this regard, he studies perspective, which is this system that is developed in the Renaissance that creates a sense of depth in a painting. But you can also do foreshortenings and create the impression that the images are coming out of the painting. He also experiments with motion, this idea that the art follows you as you move. And with these concepts, Siqueiros was able to do murals that move when you move. When you visit his murals in the castle of Chapultepec or in the La Raza Hospital, it is extraordinary how everything is dynamic and in movement. He also tried to fuse painting and sculpture, what he called la escultopintura. And he is also a pioneer in the use of photography as a way of studying reality and space. So all of these things we will talk about today when we analyze David Alfaro Siqueiros. It has been said that the fist of Siqueiros is a clear mark between the past and the future of Mexican art. And I would like to say that his influence is not only felt in Mexico, but also in the United States. Important artists like Jackson Pollock were his disciples. And even some of the ideas that were later used in abstract expressionism, like the idea of the drip painting, is very connected to the experiments that Siqueiros did, what he called the controlled accident. He also painted in California, and here he had as his assistants, as his pupils, artists that later went on to develop careers as animators for Disney and Marvel, comics, and applied in the design of these superheroes some of the ideas that Siqueiros wanted to give his proletarian workers. So he is a force that is felt everywhere. His mural, America Tropical, that was restored or conserved by the Getty, who spent almost $7 million in it, was also an inspiration for the emergence of Chicano art and Chicano artists that consider him a pioneer. He also uses spray paint and somehow anticipates the type of murals that graffiti artists are doing today. Siqueiros was born in the north of Mexico, in a city called Santa Rosalia, the 28th of December of 1896. His mother dies when he's only 2 years old, so he's largely educated by men. And the most important influence in his early development would be his grandfather, Antonio Alfaro. And Mr. Alfaro had been a soldier in Mexico's war against the French intervention. And he was a man that was well read, but was also a man of action. And he incorporated these attitudes in his everyday life. For example, they used to play hide and seek at gunpoint. And the grandfather would signal the place where he thought the kids were by shooting at that rock or that place. This is more or less the environment in which Siqueiros grew up. It's kind of ultra macho environment. Now, in this world where there was nothing artistic, it was all about men and weapons and horses. There was in the house of the family a house painter that did these little decorations that occurred in those early homes. They painted in the stairs little flowers or different details. And so this man liked to dress like a French bohemian. He had a cape and a hat, and he had certain affectation. And it is interesting that his image fascinated Siqueiros as a boy. And he too started wearing a cape and acting up. And he was inspired to start painting as well. So this is one of the earliest works that we have of his. He got a little stamp, in the shop near home of a Madonna. And he recreated it when he was still 9 or 10 years old. He would later be, the family would move to Mexico City, and he would be accepted, even though he was quite young, as a student in San Carlos. The country then was governed by Porfirio Diaz, and the father was a lawyer that had all these wealthy clients that were very close to the regime. So in many ways, the father of Siqueiros was exactly his opposite. He was a conservative, very religious man. And Porfirio Diaz is challenged by Francisco I. Madero, who proposes an election that is honest. And the sister of Siqueiros, the sister Luz, that is the only feminine figure in his early life, was an ardent revolutionary. She believed in Madero, she believed in the revolution, and it is through her that Siqueiros is converted. So we see how he is 13, he's in his early teens, but all the elements that he would have all of his life, his interest in art, his interest in politics, a certain theatrical dimension to his personality, and an urge of action. For Siqueiros, even as a young teenager, it was not enough to express an idea. he felt compelled to act on the idea. So there was a meeting one day, dinner, of Siqueiros' father. Siqueiros has two names. It's Alfaro, David Alfaro Siqueiros. Alfaro is the last name of the father. Siqueiros is the last name of the mother. So Mr. Cipriano had all his clients in the dinner table. And, all these were, connected to either they were rich hacienda owners themselves, or they were part of the bureaucracy. In other words, they were all people that are very close to Porfirio Diaz. And they knew of Siqueiros' passion for revolution and Madero and so on. So they began to bother him and tell him things like, indirect comments and so on. And Siqueiros responded. And he said, I only know that the Porfiristas are a bunch of thieves. The father was furious. And he reached out and he threw an object at Siqueiros. Siqueiros left the room and locked it from the outside. And then he proceeded to destroy the house, tear down the curtains, slam the porcelains, just like if a tornado had passed through the house. And he left it never to return again. He would join the armies of the revolution. And the battalion where Siqueiros was participating, the average age of the soldiers was 15. It was so young that people referred to the battalion as the Batallón Mamá because of the youth of the combatants. But Siqueiros was integrated right away, and he participated in the revolution. He was a soldier, not just a witness, but he had actually seen the battlefield. He had seen the actions. He had felt the solidarity of these men in combat. And he would never forget that fraternity, that connection that is expressed when people are fighting together in a revolution. Eventually, the group where Siqueiros was a soldier emerges as the victorious faction. He was under General Diegues, that was under General Obregón, who are the ones who defeat Pancho Villa and who eventually seize power in Mexico. And right after the victory of their faction, they stay in Guadalajara. Guadalajara is a cultural city. It has and had an important theater. And it was visited by famous artists. And at the time, the Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova visits Mexico. This is 1918. And Siqueiros is fascinated by the dancer and her movement. And he draws her, and these drawings that he does would be the first to be published in a local newspaper. It is interesting to note that Siqueiros begins and ends his career painting dancers, painting movement. And he is, in 1919, he is named military attaché of Mexico in Spain. And so in those days, to get to Spain, one had to go through France. And so Siqueiros meets Diego Rivera. Diego Rivera had been living in Europe now for more than 10 years. And this encounter of Siqueiros, that was about 10 years younger than Diego, is one of the great encounters in Mexican art. Each one had the information the other was desperately seeking for. For Siqueiros, Diego Rivera represented modern art. He was a friend of Picasso. He knew all about Cubism. He knew all about the revolutions in art that were happening. And for Diego Rivera, Siqueiros represented the Mexico that he had left, the Mexico of the revolution. So they both had this intense conversations. They would later be rivals and often clash in debates. But at this early stage, they hit it up famously. And even Siqueiros becomes some sort of like a sidekick to Diego Rivera, who would do these incredible tales and use Siqueiros to corroborate his tellings of how the animals in Mexico were and how the nature was so exuberant and the tarantulas were 5 inches tall and so on. And finally, Siqueiros arrives to Barcelona. And in Barcelona, he does this manifesto that is called Tres Llamamientos, 3 callings to the art. And it is interesting to note that in it, he expresses ideas that would be consistent with what he would develop all of his life, which is basically to create an art that was committed to the cause of the working people, that rejected Art Nouveau, and that tried to become a public force for the transformation of the world. He returns to Mexico, and in this he has in common with all these other artists, is given by Jose Vasconcelos the opportunity to do murals. These early murals of all 3 of them are still very much influenced by, the Renaissance. This is the first mural that Siqueiros does. Incredibly, it's about an angel. Nothing could be farther to the work that he would later pursue in his career. Here you have an example of the 3 first murals that Diego, Orozco, and Siqueiros do. You can see that they're still pretty much painting in a similar way to what the masters of the Renaissance had done in Europe. So they form a union and they start discussing and trying to figure out how to create an art that is not derivative from the European, an art that is distinctly Mexican. They have several theories, several ideas. One of them proposes to take marijuana and mushrooms and peyote and all these hallucinogenics, and that way they would connect with mythic Mexico. But these drugs and the scaffolds don't go well together, and they started falling and they discarded that idea. Then they tried to use ancient Aztec and Mayan materials from the maguey. Didn't work either. What did work is political militancy. Most of them joined the Communist Party. The newspaper that they had created for the Union of Artists becomes the newspaper of the party itself. It's called El Machete. And the politicization, the involvement in the labor struggles, in the peasant struggles, is quickly reflected in their art, where you can see how different these works are from the ones I showed you before. To your left, you see La Trinchera by Orozco. In the middle, you see A Proletarian Mother by Siqueiros. And to your right, you see a scene of the unity of workers and peasants. Now, Siqueiros goes further than his colleagues because he does not just paint the struggles, but he actually joins a union. He goes again to Jalisco and he becomes a leader of these miners' union. And he does these speeches and he's an inspiration for the workers. So much so that a funny anecdote is that there was one of these workers that was so entranced by Siqueiros' eloquence that he had a son and he called his son Union. And then he had a daughter and he wanted to call her, he called her Huelga, like strike. And then he had another daughter and he decided to call her Militancia, which, and the judge said, don't you mean militants? No, I heard militants. And that is how she is going to be called. And Siqueiros would remember how this worker was killed in a repressive act. And many years later, he found this beautiful girl that introduced herself to him and said, I am Militancia Guizar. Now, the Mexican government tolerated dissident artists. But when these artists became active militants, it was a completely different story. And so Siqueiros was imprisoned for the first time in his life. The conditions of political prisoners in Mexico was terrible. Some of them were, tortured. They called them the abandos. But Siqueiros tolerated all of the punishment and never named any names. He eventually was released with the condition that he did not leave the city of Tasco. And he would meet his first wife, Graciela Amador. In Tasco, he would paint many of the scenes that he had experienced in jail. The tortures that I was describing, the executions, and also the sense of imprisonment. Even in portraits of people that had not been political prisoners, like in this case, Moisés Sáenz, he paints him as if he were inside of a cell. Or these images of Emiliano Zapata. He would also experiment and recreate what he had seen as a labor leader. In this case, this is called the accident in the mine. And to those who criticize him and said, Siqueiros, why, if you're a promising artist, do you put yourself at risk by, participating in unions and organizing strikes and going to jail? And Siqueiros would say, well, because my art is nourished by that experience. The fire that I paint doesn't come from some mythical Olympus. It comes from the battlefields. It comes from real social and historical experiences. Now, Tasco was and still is a cultural place and a destination for filmmakers, for people that are interested in the arts. He would meet the Russian filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein, author of classic Soviet films like Ivan the Terrible, among others. And he would meet American filmmakers. And trying to find a way out of his situation, these filmmakers invite him to Hollywood, to California. So in California, Siqueiros does several murals. The first one is this one. It's called the Workers' Meeting. And it is a very important mural because it is the only one in his career that addresses specifically African Americans. It is a mural that we know where it is. It's a school now that is a Korean school. And it is the only mural of Siqueiros that has not been restored. The other two he did, and the one that is now in Santa Barbara and America Tropical are now fully restored. But this mural remains covered in this school. I have personally been there. There's been little small removals, and we can see that there is pigments of painting there. So we believe that the mural is fine and is a matter of somebody that has the power and the money to invest and restore this mural. This is what we believe the mural would look like. It's obviously colorized. The original photograph is in black and white. He also did this portrait of the bourgeoisie that is now in the Museum of Santa Barbara. But the most controversial mural would be the one he would do in Olvera Street. Olvera Street is like a mini Mexico. It's a segment like you have Chinatown and you have Koreatown. This is like a little Mexico town in downtown Los Angeles. And you know the organizers of La Placita Olvera, as we call it, wanted Siqueiros to do a mural there. And they gave him the subject matter. They said, we want you to do tropical America. And they wanted dense vegetation, this idea, that, Latin America is this place that is full of flowers and fruits. And so Siqueiros went along with the plan and did the tree trunks and the drums and all this. But then, at the final part, he said, I like to finish my murals alone. So he asked his assistants to leave, and he worked on the image of the center of the mural. When this mural was unveiled, it was immediately controversial because what Siqueiros had painted in the middle was the image of a crucified farm worker. And so the mural was attacked almost from the beginning and was pretty much whitewashed. And Siqueiros would be deported of the US. They would accuse Siqueiros of lying, that this was not true, that this kind of things did not happen. And yet the central image was not an invention. It was a lynching that had actually happened. So this mural, even though it remained very little time exposed, would be seen by the entire East Los Angeles. And they would cover it with paint. Sometimes I've heard the descriptions of how sometimes the white wash would peel and a part of the mural would emerge. So there was this kind of like a ghost that would be present and would be an inspiration for many Chicano artists in the 60s. Here you see a little bit the way the mural looked. Eventually, and I had an opportunity to participate in the process, the Getty invested a large amount of money to conserve the mural, not to restore it. In other words, not to add any painting. In Mexico, when murals are restored, they are left as it is believed they existed originally. But here the philosophy is different, at least in the Getty. The goal was not to add any painting because they believed that that would be interfering with the original art, but basically just to stop the deterioration. It was to conserve what we have and to build a museum below where you could see, photographs and historical context. This is the way now that the mural looks. Siqueiros, being deported from the United States, could not go back to Mexico, so he travels to South America. In South America, he falls in love with Blanca Luz Brum, separates from his first wife. Blanca Luz Brum had been the daughter of a prominent Uruguayan politician. She herself had been very much involved with Sandino in the Nicaraguan revolution. And together, they travel through South America. But if you read Siqueiros' memories, it seems like a police novel. I mean, they're literally running ahead of the police or the people they want to arrest him. He would paint Blanca Luz Brum many times, and he would finally arrive to Argentina. There is an interesting movie of Siqueiros' experience in Argentina. I recommend it to you. It's called El Mural. Very well acted, very well done. A very credible Siqueiros. He is not able to secure a large public commission as he would have wanted to, but what he gets is that one of the main publishers in Buenos Aires, Mr. Botana, hires him to do this mural in an underground room. And it is called El Ejercicio Plástico, the plastic exercises. And he imagines that he is inside of a bubble. And he looks at all these women around that bubble. It is a very interesting work, and it has also been fully restored. After that, Siqueiros is able to return to Mexico, and he has this kind of fiery confrontations and debates with Diego Rivera. And he accuses Diego Rivera of painting a Mexico for tourists, of not confronting Mexico's social problems. And he also accuses Diego Rivera of using archaic techniques, because Diego Rivera was a very rigorous follower of the original fresco technique. So Diego responds that his work is as real as his. And concerning the technical issue, time has given the reason to Diego Rivera, because Siqueiros, that was using all these different modern techniques and materials, sometimes his murals have deteriorated and people don't know how to restore them, whereas most of Diego Rivera's work is in impeccable condition. He also debates with José Clemente Orozco, but Orozco refuses to respond. He walks away and he says, whatever I have to say, I will say, painting. Siqueiros experiments. He uses the spray gun that you see him here. He uses acrylics and paints that dry very quickly. He establishes his workshop in New York. And among his disciples is Jackson Pollock. Now, if you look at Siqueiros' work, all the effects that you see in this painting could not be done in a conventional manner. What he does is that he drips the painting with acrylics, and once a drop touches another one, they react to each other and they create colors and textures that could not be achieved with a brush alone. So Siqueiros is able to paint these explosions, as you can see in works like this one. And Pollock does something very similar. Only that, in his case, the works are completely abstract. Now, Siqueiros would refuse to do completely abstract work because he has a commitment to paint society, to paint social problems. This is, for example, in Mexico and in some, of the big corporations or banks, the spouses of the owners give some toys to the poor people on Christmas or the Three Kings Day. And so here you see Siqueiros putting these women in this vast mass of impoverished people waiting for their gifts. So Siqueiros, his work is very modern, very interesting, very advanced, but it always has at its core human passions and human problems. Even in works like this, where he experiments with massive trees, again, you see the combination of modernity and humanity. Once he did a series of works that were completely abstract, and then a contemporary artist invited him to his studio. And this man had developed a technique where, he had a studio that was covered in white canvases. And he had this set of sponges that he would, dip into paintings of different colors. And then they would turn off the lights, and this man would throw the sponges with all force, and then they would cut the canvas and sell it. So I said, hey, Siqueiros, try it. Try my technique. And so Siqueiros goes about and does this. And then when they turn on the light, he says, look how different your work is from me. How can you explain that? And Siqueiros would say, well, because when I was a young man, I played baseball and I was a pitcher. So my throwing was stronger than yours, he would say. Siqueiros would also be, when he was doing his murals in California, many of his students would later on go to work in Disney and in Marvin. And if you compare, in the middle, you have classic Siqueiros image, his self-portrait, and you see his fist coming. But then if you notice how Superman or Tarzan is painted, they all have this kind of influence, this connection of using foreshortening to create images that are more powerful, that interact with the spectator. Now, Siqueiros was doing very well in his studios in the US, and yet he closes everything in 1936, when the Civil War of Spain begins. This war that is like a great prelude to World War II. And the Republic of Spain is basically betrayed by its own army. Here you see the head of the army, Francisco Franco, that not only leads the Spanish army against the Republic, but gets the allegiance of the Nazis and the fascists. So you have a country, a republic, that is being attacked by its own army, reinforced by the Italians and the Germans. And in the early 30s, many European countries have a policy of appeasement towards Hitler, and the idea that you could coexist with Hitler. So neither England nor France nor the US wants to get involved in a conflict that would put them directly in confrontation with the Germans and the Italians. So none of them assists the Republic. And the ones who do are volunteers, working class people, teachers, intellectuals. The US, for example, sends a group of volunteers that call themselves the Lincoln Brigade. And Among those who are fighting are singers like Paul Robeson and, George Orwell, all these different people, in addition to the civil population of Spain. Everybody trains to use weapons and to defend the country. And very surprisingly, the Republic resists the attack, the combined attack of its army and the fascists. Mexico sends also a delegation, and Siqueiros is one of the few that actually has military training. So he becomes a colonel in the Republican Army of Spain. The struggle is truly heroic. I mean, if you compare the swiftness with which Poland was defeated, or even France, I mean, it took the Germans a couple of weeks. Here, the Spanish Republic resisted all kinds of bombings and the worst. But eventually, the military superiority of the forces of Franco prevails, and more than 2 million are killed, many are deported, and Siqueiros returns to Mexico. He would get a commission by the Union of Electricians. It's a relatively small space. It's a stairway. And here he would paint all what he had experienced in Spain. His mural is almost exactly the opposite to Picasso's Guernica. Because Picasso's Guernica is like an abstraction. It could be applied to any war. Whereas Siqueiros' work is very specific. You can see the demagogue that clearly resembles Hitler. You can see the destruction of parliament, the troops, the air struggle, and then he puts this kind of machine in the center where you have all the money that is produced in the war, like this kind of bloody octopus, and then you see the people, that are suffering as a result of the war. So it's a mural that is very dramatic, and it's considered his first masterpiece. So I have a nice surprise for you. I have a tiny video of Siqueiros himself doing a guided tour of his mural in English.
This mural was painted directly on the orders of the trade union. We made this mural just when I came back from the Spanish War. We painted something, and the workers who were our patrons, they all criticized us. They say, "Have you ever seen a tower of electrical power? Have you ever seen that? You paint with wood instead of iron. What are you doing?"
Between us, there were some discussions. And for that reason, the electrician's mural is the most realistic and the most concrete. The meaning is just the fight against fascism, For that reason, we put in one side the fascists of Germany, of Italy, and the fascists of Japan. And in the other side, English, Americans, and French. Roquette is the demagogue. He asked the workers to fight for something that were not exactly true.
Schweden, Dänemark, Niederlande, Belgien, Großbritannien, Irland, Frankreich, Portugal, Spanien, die Schweiz, Liechtenstein, Luxemburg, Polen, Ungarn, Russland, Bulgarien, Türkei, Syrien, Palästina, Ägypten.
It is in this state of mind, after coming from the war and still angry at the defeat and feeling that another reason for the defeat of the Republic was the division within the left. It is a time when Siqueiros does paintings like this one, that is called El Sollozo, the cry, or this other one that is called Postrado pero no vencido, like hit but not defeated. It is in this environment where Siqueiros does the worst mistake of his life, something that would sully his reputation forever. After the death of Lenin in the Soviet Union, there had been a struggle between Trotsky and Stalin. Stalin had prevailed, and Trotsky and many other original Bolsheviks were persecuted by Stalin. Stalin installed one of the cruelest dictatorships. And Trotsky was given asylum in Mexico through the intervention of Diego Rivera. Now, Siqueiros was a supporter of Stalin, a hard part of the left. And he found it intolerable that Trotsky had been given asylum in Mexico. And so he organizes a group, arms them, and personally leads them, and tries to assassinate Trotsky. Fortunately, the machine guns of Siqueiros and his colleagues go over Trotsky. Trotsky and his wife go under the bed, and so fortunately, they do not kill him. But the idea that an artist could personally try to execute a public figure is absolutely unacceptable. Siqueiros goes into hiding. He goes back to the mines of Jalisco, where he had been a union leader. And he's finally captured by the Mexican government and imprisoned. And one day, while he's still in jail, they put a cap on his face and they take him out of the jail. Siqueiros is convinced that they're going to execute him. That was pretty common in those days. You know, they take a political prisoner, take him out of jail, and then they say run, and they shoot him, and they say, well, he tried to escape. So that is what Siqueiros thought was going to happen to him. But instead, you know, they put him in this car, and suddenly they take off the hood, and he finds himself in the presidential mansion in front of the sitting president of Mexico, Manuel Avila Camacho. The president looks at him and says, "Don't you remember me?" Siqueiros didn't remember. It turns out that during the revolution, the president had been this fat cadet that was very unpopular, and the only one that invited him into his tent had been Siqueiros. And now that he was president, he wanted to return the favor. So he allows Siqueiros to leave the country. And with the help of Pablo Neruda, he gets a visa for Chile. Chile had gone through a difficult earthquake, and Mexico donated a school where Siqueiros did a mural that is very extraordinary. It has all the drama of the South American struggle for independence. When Lincoln Christie, the founder of the New York City Ballet and a very important arts patron, saw this mural, he considered it the most important revolution in art since Picasso's Cubism. And he said, in Siqueiros, the dominant characteristic is the use of intelligence. Everything is reasoned, construed, examined, and addressed. Siqueiros returns to the international art scene in the Venice Biennale, where he obtains the second place with paintings such as this, Our Image Today, Cain, or The Devil in the Church. Now, Siqueiros is not only a great artist, he's a polemicist and a very articulate in the expression of his ideas. He would write several books. Unfortunately, they're all out of print and have not been translated. But in these publications, he brings up very interesting concept. He says, for example, the history of art is the history of discoveries. First, the human figure was suggested with silhouettes, then chiaroscuro, and later Baroque artists painted movement. Now, he says, modern art is asking us to go back. We should say no to primitivism. And he says, because we paint human beings and their passions, we are labeled academic. Imperialism does not want an art that speaks about politics or reminds people of their misery and exploitation. What they want is an art that is apolitical, that says nothing, listens to nothing, and even sees nothing. An art that is deaf and dumb, he said. So, very interesting to see Siqueiros' position. Because on the one hand, he defends the accumulation of knowledge and tradition. But then he goes to the Soviet Union and he meets with all these artists and he looks at their works. This is the kind of work that was been painted in the Soviet Union at the time. And he says to them, realism cannot be a fixed formula. In Soviet art, you are repeating old forms of realism. Your language has not changed. It has only become more technically virtuosic. So it is very interesting how Siqueiros, on the one hand, affirms the continuity of tradition. In other words, the use of chiaroscuro, of perspective. But he's in favor of a strong technical base. But he's critical of an art like the one produced in the communist countries that they do different themes, but they do it as if time had been frozen 100 years ago. In other words, he says a painting should be revolutionary, not only on its theme, but also on how you paint it. Let me give you an example. This is a conventional painting of the last Aztec emperor Cuauhtemoc. You know, they're torturing him. The myth is that Hernán Cortés, trying to discover where the treasure of the Aztecs was, tortured Cuauhtemoc by burning his feet. So here you have a conventional painting. This is the way Siqueiros paints. The painting is modern, but it uses the knowledge of the past, but also of the present. The way that he does these flames could not have been done in a conventional technical manner. And Siqueiros also has, or gives a lot of importance to perspective. Leonardo said that the value of a painting could be measured by its depth, the magic of making three-dimensional objects appear on a flat surface. Isn't this the most extraordinary invention in the history of art? Why are we asked to discard perspective as if it were a useless thing? Now, Siqueiros is a student not only of the traditional perspective, but also of the works of Uccello that projects the images as if they were coming out of the painting. And this is exactly what Siqueiros does. So he paints, in this case, a dog of a conquistador, but the dog seems about to attack us, seems to come out of the image. Now, if you go to some churches, you will see these figures of saints. And when you walk, they seem to follow you. This is also a use of perspective. In this image, if you go to one side, you will see how the two women, the woman on your left follows you with her face, the woman to your right follows you with her knees. And if you go to the other side, it does the same. I mean, we don't have enough space to do this, but this idea of capturing motion, in other words, the idea that a painting is not just a fixed, but it can appear to come out, it can appear to move. This is what Siqueiros does in some of his murals. So for example, we really could not do justice to this. We would need to recreate the entire mural so that you could walk through it. So this is something that for your bucket list to visit the moving murals of Siqueiros are fantastic. Here, for example, when you walk into this mural, it's just kind of like dome. And it is truly amazing. The women that have that horn that come at you, the workers, everything moves. This image of Prometheus literally flies, or you feel that it flies. The clouds come out. The workers come in and you know, that's so cool. It's so disappointing that nobody else is trying these things. So interesting. You know, the idea of movement and motion, really incredible. Siqueiros also uses murals to change the physical space. He's written books on how to paint a mural, again, out of print, but he describes all the process step by step. All these books could be so useful to those artists that are now trying to do public works and public murals. And he shows you how, you know, once you do the form, you can create images that move, that have a different form. He's also very interested in using photography. He says that now we have the projectors, we have the photography. The fisheye lens was dedicated to Siqueiros. Friend of Orson Welles. This is his third wife, Graciela Amador. And he uses photography also as a reference for his works. And he finds that with photography, you can pose for your own mural. You can be your own model. Siqueiros, as I said before in the introduction, is practically the inventor of the billboard, the modern billboard. And he wanted to do these paintings in the freeways that could be seen at 80 miles an hour. So the rules of perspective changed because the murals of the Renaissance presuppose a static observer. Whereas if you have a mural in a freeway that is going to be seen in a car that is going 80 miles an hour, the perspective has to be different. He was able to do one of these murals in the University of Mexico. And he poses for the image. And then he has this that you can see from far away. And he also incorporates volume, like sculpture. It's a fascinating thing. You're driving and you see these people like running by you. It's incredible. He would also fuse sculpture and painting. And one of my favorites is this one that it was supposed to be an emblem for a car. It was never done that way. But you look at this person that is running and it has 3 dimensions. And it feels like if you were running with that person, like the wind was hitting you. It's very, very interesting. And Siqueiros is also one of Mexico's great portrait artists. This is the portrait of Orozco, of Lombardo Toledano, of composer Carlos Chavez. And even in his conventional paintings, you have a sense of volume, of perspective, of motion. And I have another treat for you. It's a demonstration of Siqueiros painting with a spray gun. Let us watch. Who would ever, I don't think nobody would ever imagine that today these graffiti artists use some of these ideas in their everyday work, but without ever knowing anything about Siqueiros, a man who actually developed this way of art. This is one of my favorite portraits of Siqueiros. It's of his friend, the great composer George Gershwin. And originally he was just going to do a portrait of him, but then he asked to be with the piano. Then he said in Carnegie Hall, and then he started asking for different people in the theater. And then eventually he said, but it's still incomplete. And Siqueiros says, what is missing? You are missing, but there's no more seats. So Siqueiros placed himself in the wings. Another mural that you should see is the one Siqueiros does in the castle of Chapultepec, if you ever go to Mexico City. Here, he even asked the organizers to put more walls, because you see that the horses of coming of the revolution, you participate in a dance where you see Porfirio Diaz and all the people surrounding him and the women dancing. And so as you walk by it, you feel like you are in this Porfirian world. And then you go to another section of the mural where you have all this funeral for a worker, and the same thing. You feel as if you were one of those people carrying the body. Now, Siqueiros was in the middle of this mural when he was in prison. And this time, what had happened is that Siqueiros had dared to criticize a sitting Mexican president, President Lopez Mateos, who was going on a tour, and Siqueiros went before him and denounced him as a corrupt, for his corruption and as a repressor of the railroad workers and the teachers. And so when Siqueiros comes back, he's sent to the terrible jail of Lecumberri, the Black Palace. He was in his early 60s, and he is confined to a tiny cell. Some believe that the cancer that would kill him, he would get it by using these acrylics in such a small space. So this imprisonment lasted for over 4 years. Continued to work, and he even organized a union. He tried to make a union of prisoners, and he did a theater play called Licenciado No Me Olvides, Lawyer, or Counselor Don't Forget Me. And this is the scenery that he did. While in prison, he sent to his wife, Angelica, these flowers. And he said that one of the privileges of being an artist is that you could give flowers without cutting them. Often when you see artists painting flowers, they tend to be corny images. And yet the flowers of Siqueiros are particularly powerful. They have this kind of small explosion from their beauty. It was an international movement to demand Siqueiros' release from jail. And he's finally free, and he goes from prisoner to world recognition. Here you see him with India's Nehru. The last work that Siqueiros would do in the early 70s would be the largest mural in the world that is called the Poliforum Cultural Siqueiros. Unfortunately, this mural right now is not open. They wanted to build a building right next to it, and so right now there is a whole conflict. But it is a mural in which he applies a lot of his techniques of the fusion of painting and sculpture. He paints indoors and outdoors. It's a wonderful exterior mural as well. And as you can see, the panels have movement and have volume. Here he would do a tribute to his colleagues Orozco and Rivera. He would also do paintings of a father and child. And this image of Jesus that is in the Vatican, in which he says that only those who believe in Jesus have the right of painting. Among the last works that he would do would be these series of dancers full of movement. Siqueiros would be ill with cancer, but he did not know exactly what he had. And so when the wife takes him to the hospital, where Siqueiros had done this great mural of the future victory of science over cancer, she covered his face so that he didn't realize that he was being defeated by the sickness he believed would be conquered. Siqueiros would die the 6th of January of 1974. His last words were, "I need more time." And in closing, I would like to share with you this mural that Siqueiros would paint in Bellas Artes, where you see this woman that is breaking the chains of oppression. And I would like to share with you a quote of a young American journalist that wrote this in an LA newspaper when Siqueiros was being deported. He wrote, "The artist Siqueiros, whom the federal authorities seem so anxious to deport, is without a doubt a dangerous type. Dangerous for the spectators and retailers of art and life. For when the young confront this gigantic dynamo that pounds in the night under the rain, or clamors boldly when the brilliant sun of midday shines in the plaza, they will possibly find inspiration to rise in rebellion in future revolutions in life and art, exclaiming, 'Here comes the future.'" Thank you very much. And I